David Roberts, thank you so much for joining us today.
Totally my pleasure.
You are a thought leader, an expert for me in leadership. I'd love you to talk to me about your theories on leadership, where you think leadership is going. The floor is yours.
Well, I think my first belief about it is that we have a huge void on the planet of great leadership. And it's not that we're missing great leaders, they're there. For a whole variety of reasons, they don't show up to the things that the world needs from them. As you know, I spent much of my life trying to deal with scarcity. Scarcity of food, scarcity of water, scarcity of economics and wealth, scarcity. I mean, most of our problems are actually problems, I thought, of scarcity. But when you get into the detail of it, you realize that there's no scarcity. We've had enough food to feed everyone on the planet 1.5 times over for at least 70 years in a row. 70.
They're incredible figures.
We have enough water, fresh water on the planet for 1 trillion human beings without even impacting the environment. In other words, we don't have a scarcity, we just don't move stuff to where it needs to get moved. We don't do the things that need to get done, and that actually is a problem in leadership, which means the real problem of the world is a scarcity of great leadership. And until we fix that problem, these problems are very likely to continue, because sometimes technology can solve them, but it takes a while. Not just for the technology to arrive, it takes a while for it to get democratized and cheap enough for it to be widespread and affordable. So that's my first one. The second reason I think we don't have great leadership is because of the educational system around the entire planet. I think we talked a little about this yesterday, just about, can the world be wrong? Can the whole world be wrong about something? Is that possible? And I was thinking in history about it, and the obvious ones that stick out are, when the whole world sort of thought the Earth was flat. They're so certain of it that you would get put to death, actually, if you started to spread false lies that the world, could somehow be round, or that the world was at the center of the universe. And so we know these histories where the whole world is wrong about something, and then we think today, we got rid of all those things. I think the whole world is wrong about education. I looked into it a little bit. Our educational system was basically built around a tax system where the British colonialists needed to have the colonies read the documents and then do the math to pay the taxes, and our system is still based on that. So in the US, and in many countries around the world, you get a math score and you get a verbal score. One of the things I've painfully, I would say, learned in my adult life, because I did well on those scores. My math score and my verbal score had absolutely no input at all to me figuring out how to live a successful life. It's not relevant. So if we have an education system teaching something that's not so relevant, I mean, I spent I think, an entire year learning how to factor polynomials, and I've actually never had to do one, Yeah. And so where do people learn leadership? Well, if you're a civilian, there really isn't anywhere to learn leadership. I mean, even if you go to Harvard Business School, they don't teach leadership, they teach business. And in the business that they teach, it's about problems, it's about case studies. There are places where they teach it. We see it in religious institutions. We see it in the military. And they teach leadership. The character of these people gets changed.
So that's your definition of when a leader evolves, it's when their character evolves.
It's beautifully put. So there are skills which is things you can easily teach someone, something to know. Skills are, shooting a gun is a skill. And then there are character traits. My good friend Rich Davini wrote a book called The Attributes. He calls them attributes. Attributes are things like humility. So people say, well, why is humility important? Why should a leader be humble? I know a lot of leaders that are not humble. It's like, do you know leaders that are humble? Because great leaders are all humble. And the reason they're humble is that if you're humble, you realize you don't know everything, which means you become curious. And if you're curious, you keep learning about things you don't know, and then you become intelligent. In other words, humility equals curiosity, which equals intelligence. So leaders that are not humble will not be curious about a whole set of topics, and they will not learn. And great leaders keep learning, they keep getting better. Rich Davini loves to talk about this difference between persistence and perseverance. Persistence, trying the same thing over and over. Some things need persistence. If you're going to smash a rock, you actually just want to keep hitting it in the same place, the exact same way. If you're a fly and you're trying to get through a window, that doesn't work so well. And you need perseverance. You need to be trying different things over and over until something new works. So these are attributes, and they can be learned. And we know that because these institutions teach them. But unfortunately, they're taught for that specific purpose. So if you have a military leader, they've been taught leadership skills, but it's for that military purpose. What we need is leadership education that happens, I would say leadership development that happens, not just for leaders in the civilian world, but just for people. In my definition, the fourth point I'll make, in my definition of leadership is leaders help people, but they help people live a better life. That's ultimately what they do. It gets muddled in leadership in business, but the whole reason that we have business is to help people live better lives. The wonderful part about that definition is it means that anybody can be a leader. Mother Teresa, incredibly helpful person. No one reports to her. She's an extraordinary leader. And there are a whole set of examples of this, but the idea that anybody can be a leader, it's very different than management. So yes, in answering your question, great leaders are made from great character, not from skills. And what we would call leaders that are not so good are not made of those things. And we notice it. And it makes us hard to want to be like them.
You talk about exponential leadership. What is exponential leadership when you, in your talks, in your discussions?
Yeah, everyone always thinks it's about technology because they hear about exponential tech. It has nothing to do with technology. It has everything to do with the idea that really great leaders don't create just more followers. Sort of B-level leaders create more followers because it creates security for them. But really great leaders create more leaders. And organizations that are filled with leaders are highly adaptable. Organizations that are filled with a leader and a whole set of followers are adapting only to that single person. And so we see that they succeed for a while, and then they don't because the world changed. Or they don't because the leader leaves, and then all of that control is gone and the organization can't perform. So really great leaders, when they leave, the organization keeps getting better. And so you think, well, where do we teach that? Where do people learn that? And so if you don't know it, then you're trying to just get the best results while you're there. And that puts a lot of organizations into a very difficult spot. Not just organizations, countries. So, yeah.
Particularly at the moment, countries, but let's keep it at that personalised perspective, because I love what you said about where does a civilian go to learn how to be a leader? And I know you've done some quite extensive work. You've had remarkable experiences in your life about developing these leadership characters. Talk to us about the programs that you have been involved with, but also the program that you've created.
And so this to me, and thank you for asking that, because when I think about what am I really passionate about today, it's solving this scarcity of leadership problem. And so to solve that problem, we have to get good at creating extraordinary leaders. The world depends on that. And we have to get good at finding already existing extraordinary leaders and helping them to get to the places that the world needs them. This is not service. When you think about how do people get into something that they really enjoy doing and are good at, and they get paid for, otherwise it's a hobby, and the world needs. You and I, we've been involved in these programs where we train executives. Many of the executives I realize that come to these programs are really good at what they do. They create enormous wealth, and they're passionate about it, but they're empty. And they're empty because many times they get into these things where they have those three, but they don't have this fourth one, which is, what does the world need? So the idea is simply, well, let's do that then. Let's create a place where we can develop great leaders. The challenge is that great leaders don't get developed by giving them talks or giving them books to read or writing things on a chalkboard or any of the ways that we traditionally learn. You can teach them about leadership. It's sort of like teaching somebody about what is a healthy diet versus having somebody actually live healthy. Leaders are not educated into leadership, they're forged. And they're forged by putting them into challenging circumstances that are emotionally charged, and then because the emotion is with it, they remember it forever. And that is also how people get transformed. You can't transform people through information. I mean, yes, they get some insights.
Well, they get the inspiration to follow it, but they don't actually get that transformation. Yeah.
And it is, and it's critical to give them that information, but it's a little like you can tell somebody, let's say somebody is maybe not ethical. Maybe they bribe a lot of people. So you can tell them that's a bad idea. But if you want transformation, that happens only in their mind. And it happens only through the emotional experiences that have them change a pattern that is persisted in their life. The brain is such a pattern machine. It loves to do what it did last minute, what it did last hour, what it did last week, what it did last year. It loves to do that because that's just how the actual neurons in the brain work, is they're set up by these patterns. So if you want to break a pattern, there has to be a significant change. And when the change is emotional, it's lasting and it's very effective.
So the programs that you developed, or this program, the Jedi program that you've developed, inspires is the wrong word to use, creates that lasting change through several experiences.
Yeah. So, Jedi, well, there's sort of two versions of Jedi. There's sort of the 4-day version of Jedi where somebody can be exposed to all of these insights. And then it would take them their own time and effort to pursue that. And then we have the Jedi program itself, which is a 10-week program, but it's spread over 2 years. So it's just a week kind of each season, a couple of times each year. Well, one time each year, it's a couple of weeks. And there we actually put them through the experiences. So they think that they're going to learn some useful experience, but the experience is there so that we can put them in the situations where they then can learn these character traits. So we have Well, like the very first one is a very exciting, so it's the Navy SEAL driving course. And so you can imagine a little what this is like. It's, everybody knows how to drive, but on the very first day, you're doing a bootlegger turn where you're spinning the car around at high speed in the opposite direction, usually to get away from something. And I've done this, by the way, with people that have never driven a car, so they don't even have a driver's license yet. And the very first thing they've done in a car is to do one of these reverse bootlegger turns. So they think they're learning these skills that might save their life one day. But the reason that we do that is to put them into situations where they have opportunities to exercise these attributes. Maybe an attribute of compassion, where they see the other person failing and they can help. Or even better is we put them in the situation where they're failing, and then there's somebody else that for some prior reason is inclined to not help them, but helps them anyway. And those experiences can be very emotional, and they're memorable, and they change you. They change you.
And that's where the transformation comes, because you can't really change somebody without that inner transformation.
Yeah.
It's not really change, is it? It's the next development.
It is a pattern change in the mind, though. All these things, they happen in the mind. And people don't think they do. Like when people suffer about something, they think somebody else caused it, or some other they think the situation caused it. But suffering only happens in the mind, which means that if the mind chooses to interpret something differently, it doesn't suffer, or it doesn't have an emotion that somebody else might think you have to have because of that circumstance or because of that person. So you can understand this intellectually, but it's very different to have built that pattern in the brain. When the pattern is built, it's a one-way door. You never go back. It's a little bit, I think, like ethics are that way.
I very much feel what you're saying, because there have been instances where a phrase or a word has been used repeatedly, and I have thought to myself, if I hear that phrase one more time, I'm just sick of it, I don't want to hear it. But then I'll hear it and it will land, and it's a whole different feeling. And that's the feeling that I'm getting from you when you actually land this experience, and it builds that additional piece of your character that allows you to move forward and be the leader that you're talking about.
And and the challenge today is that some people land these experiences sometimes out of happenstance, sometimes because they choose very challenging paths, and then they get their fair share of it. But most people don't get these experiences. I mean, if they got them when they were growing up from their parents. And then that's very subject to whether their parents had them or not. And so many people get their character traits from their parents. And then it takes considerable effort on their part to change that.
What was it that led to your transformation? So if you could pinpoint, maybe it's not a moment, but what was an experience that actually led you to where you are now, or that started, even if you know, that started the journey into leadership, into the thought leadership that you do?
Well, I can think about the very first day I was officially on the job. So when I went through college, the military paid for my MIT degree. So I owed them 4 years afterward. When I went through MIT, I got kind of fire hosed. And that's like their process. But my reaction to it was not the ideal reaction. And so because I was fire hosed by it, when I graduated, I didn't want to do it anymore. I felt like I had enough engineering to last me a lifetime. I didn't want to do more. And so when I wanted to go into the Air Force, I didn't want to do it as an engineer. And so I remember looking through this book one day, through every job an officer could hold, to find a job that I wanted, that I thought I could do, and that wasn't. And then I came across this one, and it said special agent. And I had watched a lot of James Bond movies because my mom liked watching movies. And I'm reading through this document, and I mean, it seems unreal in terms of how great this job could be. And then there's a little paragraph at the bottom that's all the bad things about the job. And the bad things were I would not have to wear a uniform, I'd have to travel a lot, I would have to carry a gun, like all things that to me just sounded like all of the bad things were good things. So I end up doing that. And so you go through the special agent training, which was one of the really extraordinary experiences for me. Well, one of the first ones, at least. Because there they also have certain character attributes they're trying to build. It's not just skills, right? They're trying to change people so that they are not afraid, for example, of dangerous people in the world. And on the very first day, my very first day of the job, I'm stationed at a Bolling Air Force Base. We have responsibility for the Pentagon across the river. And my commander comes in and he's like, Special Agent Roberts, your very first assignment, the Secretary of Defense has gotten this threatening letter for his life, and we need you to go and take the letter as evidence. So there's a whole procedure around that. But, you know, for me it was like, oh, my first mission, like, you know, and it's very strange because I'm 21 at the time, and I have a gun, and there's a Uzi submachine gun, and I'm going over into the Pentagon, and it's surreal to me.
And you're Special Agent Robert.
Yeah. You know, and I have no self-awareness that I look 21. You know, I just think that I must look the way that I see all the other special agents. And so, you know, and it's funny, you get over there, and at that time you could actually park inside the middle of the Pentagon. And it was always strange to me because they have you open the trunk, you know, and you have a machine gun. I mean, it's an odd thing. It's like, how did they let me in? So I go up, I get this letter. I don't meet the Secretary of Defense, but there's a colonel at the desk and I take it with the evidence and put it in this Ziploc bag so that there's no fingerprints or anything else. And this is in DC, it's a hot summer day. I get back in the car's been sitting in the sun. I'm crossing over the 14th Street Bridge, and I roll the windows down, and as I roll them down, I can see this envelope floating up in the air like this, and then whoop, it pops out the window.
Oh my gosh.
So I was brought up never to curse, but oh my gosh, I couldn't believe what was coming out of my mouth. And I put the red light on the top of the car, I pulled the car over, I'm stopping traffic on the bridge to get this letter, but it is gone. It's a windy, hot summer day. It's somewhere in the river, I can't even see it, it's gone. And I end up driving around for 2 or 3 hours. Like, I didn't know what to do. I'm just paralyzed in a decision. And which is kind of odd, because now in hindsight I look back and I just think, okay, what were my decisions? I could, 1, go in, tell the commander what happened, or 2, you know, move to Venezuela and try and get off the grid and just hide. You know, those were the only 2 decisions, and one was a terrible one was a good one. And yet I was still paralyzed by it. And I remember going in to see him. He's like, oh, especially Robert, you look like you saw a ghost, you know. And I had to tell him the story, and it had a nice ending. He takes me to the basement, and he pulls this file drawer out, and it's July. It's all the letters that Secretary of Defense has gotten threatening his life in July. You know, it's like he gets them every day. It's just that day he only got one. You know, and so, but for me at that moment, I remembered thinking, wow, why was I paralyzed? What is it about my decision making, about my leadership? Because good people, everybody wants to be a good leader, but not everybody is. And so how can we help people to close that gap? Because if people are aspiring for something, and for many people, being a leader is like one of the greatest things that they want to do in their life, to positively influence other people. How can we inspire them then to do the things that are necessary, because it's not about skills, but to go through this development process where the character gets changed, and then they become the person that people want to follow and that people want to be like, and they become the person that can influence others in a way to create positive change for the world. If we can begin to spread that idea around the world, I think that is what changes and presents such a positive future. And it's why I get actually very excited. I'm very positive. I don't like what's happening in the world right now. But I'm very positive about the future because I can see that path. And that path is that extraordinary leaders start showing up. And literally in many cases, it just takes one change of a person to change an entire organization. So it's very exciting to me.
David Roberts, you have brought that beautifully round to close our conversation right now. Thank you so much for your knowledge, your wisdom, your leadership. I look forward to having more conversations with you.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here. And thank you for the work you do.